With borrowing costs reaching all-time highs and house prices continuing to climb, California housing affordability just hit the lowest level that we've seen since 2007, with only 15% of California households able to afford the median price home of $843,600 in the third quarter of 2023. Now, this is down from 16% last quarter and down nearly 3% from the same quarter in 2022. So with this, you can see how much rising interest rates are playing into buyer demand and in turn affecting housing affordability as well as the number of transactions that are actually closing. At the moment, you need a minimum annual income of just over $221,000 to be able to make the monthly payments associated with that median home price, which equates to nearly $5,530 per month, which includes the principal, interest, taxes, and insurance. Now, the crazy thing is that's based off a 30-year fixed rate at 7.14%, which is actually lower than where interest rates are today. In fact, mortgage rates on a 30-year fixed hit an average of 8% just a few weeks ago, which is the highest level that we've seen in 23 years. But since then, we actually saw the Fed pause for the second consecutive meeting, along with slower growth in employment, in addition to inflation coming in a little bit better than expected. And with that, we've actually seen the 30-year fix improve significantly from those 8% rates that we saw just a couple of weeks ago. But something to keep in mind when we're talking about interest rates, for every 1% move in interest rates, it either allows 5 million people to be able to purchase a home and or disqualifies them from buying a home. So if interest rates go from say 7% to 8%, the competition in the market drops by nearly 5 million people. But on the flip side, if interest rates improve by 1%, in theory, you have nearly 5 million more eligible buyers that could be competition in the market. Now, all 5 million of them aren't going to go out and buy a home, but the reality is as mortgage rates come down, that in turn is going to increase competition in the market. And when it comes to the median price condo or townhome in California, that's sitting at $650,000. And at the moment, only 23% of home buyers in California can actually afford to purchase with interest rates above 7%, needing a minimum annual income of just over $170,000 to be able to afford that mortgage payment that equates to just over $4,260 per month. So the reality is something has to give in order for more Californians to be able to afford property. And in my personal opinion, it's not going to come from a crash in home prices. In fact, the only crash that I think you're going to see in the California housing market has already happened, and that's a crash in the number of transactions actually taking place. So the real question is, what are we likely to see as we finish off 2023 and head into the first quarter of 2024? Well, in order to talk about that, I think it's important to talk about where we are at the moment. But before we do that, I'd like to take a minute and ask a favor. If you find any value in my videos at all, do me a favor and hit that thumbs up. Not only does it help the YouTube algorithm push it out to more people like you, it helps me accomplish my goal of helping educate buyers and sellers here in Orange County. And with that, if you want to stay updated on everything local when it comes to real estate, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. So at the moment here in Orange County, our inventory is sitting at 2,435 available homes. Now, I know to a lot of you watching this video, that doesn't really mean anything, but let's provide a little context here. Orange County consists of roughly 3.3 million people, and that 2,435 homes that I was talking about includes single-family homes, condos, townhomes, in addition to luxury property out there in the market. And to provide even more context, last year, this time, inventory was sitting at 3,581 homes, which is roughly 43% higher than where we sit today. And the 3-year average prior to COVID was sitting at 5,822 homes, which is over 133% more than where we are today. So as I always talk about in other videos, it always comes back to supply and demand. And at the moment, demand is really, really low because of housing affordability, because mortgage rates are sitting above 7%. But even though demand is low, inventory is also really low. So they're more or less in balance. And that's exactly why you've seen a stability in home prices and you haven't seen home prices move big in either direction. In addition to that, we're also moving into a slower time of the year. This is typically what we refer to as the holiday market. Now, the holiday market is different than the other markets because they're usually getting together with family, they're out doing different holiday celebrations, and they just don't want people walking through their homes. Therefore, there's typically less inventory on the market. Now, this year has been a little bit different in the fact that inventory continued to climb into September and October. Normally, we would see the peak in inventory sometime around the end of August, maybe the beginning of September. But because mortgage rates continued to climb during this period of time and there was just less buyer demand out there in the market, that means there were less transactions taking place. So even though there wasn't a lot of inventory coming to the market, there also wasn't a lot of buyer demand putting those homes under contract. Therefore, inventory continued to grow. In fact, we just saw the most homes on the market last week sitting at 2,496 properties. But as I always say, it's important to understand the context. Even at 2,496 homes, that's the second lowest level to start November since 2004, right behind where we were in 2021. And the reality is inventory is likely going to continue to decline through the remainder of the year, hitting the lowest level sometime around New Year's. And another thing to understand about that 2,435 homes that are currently on the market, 66% of those homes are actually over $1 million, leaving you only 34% of the homes that are on the market under that 1 million mark. But let's say we go to 1.25 million. Well, that equates to 44% of the available inventory out there in the market. Homes from $0 up to 1.25 million equate to 44% of the inventory. Now, when we look at buyer demand in that same price range is sitting at 62%. So at the moment, if you're out there looking as a buyer in that price range under 1.25, it still looks to be a seller's market when that home is priced correctly because you have more buyer demand than you have available inventory, which is exactly the opposite when it comes to looking at the luxury inventory, with nearly 33% of the available inventory out there sitting above $2 million. And on the same token, only 13% of the buyer demand is looking at those homes. So if you're a buyer out there and you're in the luxury space, chances are you have more room to negotiate. There's actually more room to get a deal at that price point because there's just less buyer demand out there. Whereas if you're on the other side of the spectrum and you're a buyer looking for a home, say under $2 million, well, one thing to keep in mind, there's only 1,631 homes available under that price point, and quite a bit of competition if the home is priced right. And that's something I want to point out. If you're a buyer out there in the market right now and a home's been sitting on the market for say 15 days or 20 days or even 30 days, that doesn't mean that that home is grossly overpriced by any means, because you have to consider it's a slower time of the year. There's less buyer demand out there for one, due to seasonality, and there's also less buyer demand out there because of where mortgage rates are. But what I will say is homes that are priced right about where they should be and are nicely fixed up, they're turnkey, those homes are still getting multiple offers even in the current environment. So if that's the type of property you're looking at, you've got to come in and be strong with your offer. In addition to that, there's a lot of cash out there in the market. In fact, 1 in 3 buyers nationwide is still buying with all cash. And if you want a really good example, I actually sold my house about a month ago, and 3 of the 4 offers that I received on my property were all cash offers. So if you're a buyer out there in the market and the home is priced right, just understand that you're going to have to plan accordingly when making that offer. Even though rates are high and demand is low, that doesn't necessarily mean a seller is willing to give away their property. And that's going to take me into what I believe is going to happen over the next couple of months into 2024. Now, I personally believe that mortgage rates are going to moderate. I think mortgage rates are going to continue to come down. Now, they're not going to come down as quickly as they went up. In fact, I think it's going to be a slower grind lower. But I do think there's an opportunity for mortgage rates on a 30-year fix to end somewhere with a 6 handle by the end of the year. And as mortgage rates decline a little bit, you're going to see a little bit more buyer demand out there in the market. But because it's a slower time of the year and there's just less inventory on the market, it's not really going to reflect in the number of transactions. Even though the number of transactions and applications and mortgage demand might report higher than expected in some of the data, you have to understand you're working from a really, really low bar. So any small jump is going to report higher than it probably should. So with that, real estate is probably going to continue to slow throughout the remainder of the year, which means you're not going to see home prices continue to go up, but you're also not likely to see big drops in home prices either unless something is severely overpriced or that seller's in a position where they absolutely have to do something by the end of the year. But as the year turns, you're likely going to start to see some more inventory trickle to the market. Now, when we talk historically speaking, inventory doesn't typically start to pick up until sometime around Super Bowl weekend. Now, over the last couple of years, we haven't really seen that because we've had these crazy markets out there with super low interest rates. And that's another thing that's currently playing into the current environment, is because you have 90% of homeowners sitting on an interest rate below 4%. So even if mortgage rates drop to say 6.5%, 6%, you still have a lot of homeowners that have a 3.5% rate that aren't willing to give up that rate to buy a higher priced home at a higher rate because of how much that affects their monthly payment. So while I do believe inventory is going to start to increase a little bit in 2024 as mortgage rates decline, I expect to have a market very similar to the one that we've seen in 2023, which means you're not going to really see a lot of appreciation, and the number of home sales is going to be muted compared to years past. And that's exactly why I believe if you're looking to purchase a home in this environment, you need to have a longer term time horizon, not because home prices are going to crash, but there's a really good chance that we see sideways movement in the housing market just because of how much it's increased over the last couple of years. But with that, I'd like to know your thoughts. Where do you think the California housing market's headed? Where do you think Orange County is headed? Do you think we're going to see a lot of inventory come to the market and prices are going to crash? Or are we going to see very little inventory and the housing market continue to do what it's been doing? Do me a favor and let me know in the comments below. But with all of that, I think it's super important that if you are deciding to buy or sell a house, that you're working with a professional out there in the market, someone that understands the current environment, someone that understands the data, can guide you through that process and ultimately help you make sense of what's going on. And if you need that person, I personally would love the opportunity to guide you through that process. My contact information is in the description below. So at the moment, if you're a home buyer out there sitting on the sidelines, just waiting to see what happens, my advice is to focus on the things that you can control, the things that are going to impact your mortgage rate, that are going to impact your monthly payment more so than anything else, with the primary one being your credit score. Get your credit score as high as possible because that credit score is going to have a bigger impact on the mortgage rate you receive than anything else. So as mortgage rates decline, you're able to put yourself in the best position to take advantage of the best rates out there, which in turn means a lower monthly payment.